Good morning, everyone. I'm Congressman Joe Crowley, the chair of the Democratic Caucus, joined by the vice chair, Linda Sanchez, as well as the leader of the Democratic Caucus, Nancy Pelosi, and the minority whip of the Democratic Caucus, Steny Hoyer, will soon be joined, I believe, by the assistant leader, Jim Clyburn, momentarily, as well as Ben Ray Lujan, the chair of the DCCC. The president failed yesterday, once again, to show leadership or a vision for our great nation. And when too many Americans are struggling economically, we deserve a real leader with both a vision for our future and the capacity to lead us there. From his racist, demonizing comments on immigrants to the complete lack of any mention in relation to securing our democracy from the Russian government. This speech wasn't new, it wasn't good, and it won't change any fundamental dynamics of our nation moving forward. With that, let me recognize the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, and thank you for being with us. The President last night made some overtures towards working together to achieve some shared priorities. But saying that we should work together in a bipartisan way is really different from actually achieving results. They're two entirely different things. Unfortunately, one evening's speech doesn't erase a conflict-ridden, chaotic year that has driven our country even further apart. Democrats have continually extended an offer to work together on the challenges that our country faces and that the American public demands that we confront. But each and every time we've had the door slammed in our faces. It's going to take action and not just mere words by the president and by the congressional Republican leadership to reach across the aisle and to bring our country together. The Washington Post front page today says, a call for bipartisanship. Well, let me tell you, Democrats have been dialing that number for more than a year. Now it's up to the president and congressional Republicans to answer that call and to actually act on those words. For me, the first step begins by finally addressing the needs of dreamers. It's a priority that too long has been pushed to the back burner. I think that a simple solution that is on the table right now is available to us. There is a bipartisan bill that has been introduced by Will Hurd and Pete Aguilar that, if scheduled for a floor vote, would pass with a majority of the members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats. Sometimes the simplest solution is best. Let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be. Let's pass that bill first. Let's build some bipartisan trust and goodwill. Then we can have serious conversations about big infrastructure bills and comprehensive immigration reform. But until we see some serious action on the part of Republican leadership to show that they actually are willing to work with us and not just giving us lip service, it's all just talk. With that, I would like to introduce the leader of our caucus, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I thank the Chairman and Vice Chair for calling a caucus meeting who can soar with the eagles in the morning after hooting with the owls last night for a late night, and I commend all of you for doing both as well. It was a very transformative speech for some of us last night, because while our expectations for greatness and vision with the president are not high, he stooped to a new low in terms of how he dealt with issues. For example, the immigration issue and what it has meant to our country and how he characterized it. The opioid epidemic, which is in every district in the country a challenge, in many families a tragedy, and the president treated it in such a disdainful way. Actually, it is one of the items on the agenda that we're fighting for, increased funding for opioids in the discussion that we're having on the caps, on the parity issue, on the budget. Last night, the president delivered a speech of unwarranted self-congratulatory comments, beautiful to acknowledge the courage, the sacrifice of the people in the audience, as if he had something to do with the successes that they had achieved. Of course, we all salute them. It's an interesting story. More importantly, it's about the fabric of America that his speech was not about. again, devoid of vision. So sad. The president presents himself with this GOP tax scam as something to help the middle class. He kind of presented that. Well, at the same time, his tax scam calls for 86 million middle-class families to pay more as he pads the pockets of the top 1%. The president presents himself as generous toward dreamers, but he's holding them hostage to the most extreme anti-immigrant agenda in generations. We heard more insulting words of ignorance and prejudice toward patriotic immigrant families last night. I just remind you, and I've said this to his people, this is a first in a long time. President Reagan was great on immigration. He did more than Congress did after Congress passed a bill. President George Herbert Walker Bush was great on immigration. The two of them protected a higher percentage of people than President Obama did with his executive orders. With their executive orders, they protected a higher percentage. President Clinton, of course, President Obama, President George W. Bush, one of the best presidents in advocating for immigrants and what immigration means to America, could not convince his own party. And now a president in complete departure of Republican presidents in modern times, Republican and but you would expect the Democrats, Republican presidents in the lead, taking us down a road just red meat for his base. The president presents himself as a man of big ideas, and then he presents a lame, puny infrastructure proposal, completely underestimating or ignoring the infrastructure challenges our country faces. $200 billion over 10 years. That's $20 billion a year. And he advertises it a $1.5 trillion agenda. But again, giveaways to the private sector. Meanwhile, President Trump is completely silent about Russia's ongoing assault on our democracy and his administration's outrageous refusal to impose sanctions. What's that about? What is that about? Overwhelmingly, was it Steny, over 500 people voted for the sanctions bill? The sanctions against Russia, and the president is ignoring it. What do the Russians have on him politically, personally, financially, that he would ignore his responsibility in that regard? President Trump's first years in office has been a wasted opportunity in meeting the needs of the American people. Again, he had an opportunity for unity. We always are hopeful for that. Instead of a hand of friendship, as some have said, he presented a clenched fist. And a fish at that. We were very proud of our response. Congressman Joe Kennedy in Massachusetts did such a beautiful job in responding. Delegate Elizabeth Guzman of Virginia responded beautifully and officially on behalf of a Democratic point of view. Democrats believe that the American people deserve better than what the president talked about last night. We deserve a better deal, better jobs, better pay, a better future. And that's what we will be working on. I found it liberating. It freed me of my personal thoughts about the president and said, this is so much bigger than that. None of us can afford the luxury of minor disagreements. This is very major. With that, I'll yield to our distinguished witness, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader. I think the floor reflected the deep disappointment, not only that we had last night at the President's speech, but what we've had for the last year with the President's performance. We spent all year of 2017, not on jobs bills, not on infrastructure bills, not on positive ways to lift up America. We spent literally the first 3 quarters of the year taking steps to undermine the health care of all Americans and to increase the price premiums for those who were lucky enough to have remaining coverage. We then spent the last 3 months forging and passing a tax bill that advantages, as the leader said, the 1%, and gives but 17% of all the resources that we're going to borrow, $1.5 trillion, to those working men and women that the president talked about last night and that the speaker had talked about on the floor. President Trump tried to put a fresh coat of paint on a failing presidency. It didn't work. Americans see through the rhetoric and understand the reality. The president has made our country less safe, less strong, and less proud over the past year. Not less proud of our country and its basic principles, but less proud of our failure to give to the rest of the world the leadership that they need and crave. Where we have lost respect throughout the world. I don't know what polls the president or who he's talking to, but anybody who travels anywhere in the world knows that there is less respect for America and less trust in America, which is dangerous. His speech was clearly not a unifying speech. He appealed to his partisan base instead of reaching across the aisle. His immigration proposal betrays family values and uses Dreamers as a bargaining chip to harm other families. Millions and millions of Americans saw me sitting to the president's left and Dick Durbin sitting to his right, and Republicans and Democrats sitting around the table. And Senator Grassley and Senator Feinstein said, we need to make sure that the DACA protectees are protected. Senator Grassley said they didn't do anything wrong and they came to this country. Let's deal with them first. Let's protect them first. And the president said, yes. But he didn't mean yes. Last night he talked about putting a bipartisan proposal forward. I don't know a single Democrat in America, not one, that believes what he offered was a bipartisan, or that he was doing what he said he would do and protect the DACA folks first. Now, he has put in, and I'm pleased at that, an expansion to 1.8 million people and a path to citizenship. That's what he said he would do. We're glad that he did it, but we're surprised that he did what he said, because he coupled that with a draconian proposal that was, in his own words, to be in the second phase of negotiations. And his infrastructure proposal that he made last night, not a single comment on how he was going to pay for it. And very frankly, 12 months later than he said he was going to put it down. He also made false claims. He took credit for others' successes. He took credit for job creation under President Obama, when in fact 2017 was the lowest job growth in 6 years. He made claims about his tax bill that have been debunked. Instead, he's given tax cuts to the wealthy, the upper 1%. I tell people that the average person, of which Speaker Ryan talked, is going to get $1,082. And the person at the 1% is going to get $1,198. You say that's pretty close. The 1,082 is in a year. The 1,198 is in 1 week. And he claimed is restoring our standing in the world. I can't understand where he's getting his facts from or his information from, but he must be reading fake news, because all over the world we are seeing a reduction in the confidence of the leadership of the United States. The president's speech was a disappointment and a missed opportunity. The American people deserve better. Let's hope they get better in the year ahead. And I now yield to my friend, the Assistant Leader, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whip, Madam Leader, colleagues. Last night, as many of you may have noticed, I sat on the floor dressed in black a black suit on in solidarity with the Me Too movement in America. Happen to be the father of three daughters, who have got me calibrated on that issue. I also wore a kente tie, as many other members of the Black Caucus did, and many wore shawls and scarves in kente colors. We did so to sit in solidarity with Haiti, El Salvador, and those countries on the continent of Africa that were referred to by our president in very derogatory terms. We thought that it was necessary for us to demonstrate as members of the Congress our displeasure with the president. I heard from one of my daughters just after the speech, and she sent me a picture that's been circulating of my countenance as I sat on the floor. Well, I did that. I was feeling that because if you just look at what I consider to be the lowest point in the president's speech last night was when he says, Americans dream too. We know that. I grew up dreaming. Many of us still adhere very much to the dream enunciated by Martin Luther King Jr. Back in 1963. But to use that condition to denigrate, to dilute the emphasis we're trying to place on those young people, some not so young now, brought to this country through no fault of their own and dreaming of becoming citizens and becoming productive citizens in our country, for the president to demean them as he did last night was a very, very low point to me. Coming close to that was the president attempting to take credit for the unemployment rate of African Americans in the country. The fact of the matter is, if you go back and look, in 2011, the unemployment rate for African Americans in this country was around 16.8%. And if you look at what it was when this president took office, it had dropped 9 points. It had dropped 9 points, around 8.6%. Since that time, it has dropped 1 point. 9 points from 2011 down to the time that he took office, and 1 point since. And to imply that his policies caused all of that, to me, was insulting. And so I would hope that, as was pointed out already, that if we are going to look to the future, rebuild this country's infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, but our ports, doing what needs to be done for rail, doing what needs to be done to make airline travel safer. If we are going to do what's needed to be done to rebuild our schools and broadband in rural America, if we are going to do what needs to be done to clean up our environment and to produce energy, low-cost, clean energy, we need to get on the same page, and we cannot do it with a 10-year, $200 million program, $200 billion program. 10-year program. That's $20 billion a year for 10 years. We need to flesh out a program, much like the president mentioned last night, $1.5 trillion program, for which he gives us nothing to work with. And we can do that in a bipartisan way. We can do that in a way to put people back to work, do that in a way that middle-income families will begin to rise to the levels, educate their children. If we can do that in a way that would clean up our environment and make this country a better place, and we put our families in a better place. And with that, I'd like to yield to the distinguished chair of the DCCC.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. To all my colleagues here today, I can't say thanks enough for the work that they do day in and day out in reaching out to hardworking families across America. I think what we saw last night was President Trump painted a very dark picture. And you contrast that with the remarks that we heard from Joe Kennedy, who was inspirational. He talked about real plans and ideas to help hardworking families across the country. The eloquence of Delegate Guzman, speaking directly to the president, but reaching out to earn the trust of the American people. Two very different pictures that were painted last night. And I really believe where the country is today is they want to be forward-looking. They're tired of this dark cloud that has been hanging over this administration. And look, with the words the president shared last night, there was a lot of talk. And especially when it came to combating opioid addiction, this is not the first or even second pronouncement this president has made with doing something concrete to help people suffering across the country. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. President. And let's get to work. This is a bipartisan effort. Democrats and Republicans want to work together, so let's do something real to help the American people. What was absent last night, the president did not talk about how to help the American people when it comes to access to health care. And what the president also did not talk about was the rising premiums at the hands of Republicans. In the Republican tax scam, actions were taken by House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and by President Trump that are going to increase premiums on the American people. Actions taken by House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and President Trump with the destabilizing of the marketplace are increasing premiums on the American people, and he refused to talk about it. So when you look at the difference with where we are today, that dark cloud that continues to hang over this administration, that dark picture that he painted last night, pales in comparison to the conversation that we will continue to have with the American people about how to help all these hard-working families. That's the difference with where we are. Let's work together to get people back to work. A real infrastructure plan that is concrete with ideas, not just filled with words. And I yield back to Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. I would just say there's something noble about a fist, Madam Leader. Where I come from in Queens, the president said he offered his hand last night, but it was the back of his hand in the words that he expressed during that speech. With that, we'll open up to questions. People have it. Yes.
Congressman, have you or have any of you, have you gotten any indications that the White House or Republican leaders are willing to negotiate when it comes to family-based immigration? And if so, do you have a deal?
Well, in terms of that, first of all, the very idea that the president refers to chain migration is totally insulting. We're talking about, actually, I think one of the guests that he had up there had family unification, and that's why his family is here in the United States. But the president, of course, couldn't face that fact. And that's about what the whole problem is. The president, facts, data, evidence, truth have no place in the discussions with the president. There is a path to finding an immigration agreement. Sometimes the president will say in our conversation, well, I like to put something way out there and then we negotiate back. But that hasn't been the case. He's just setting another bad standard from which we have to reject. There is, if you keep this strictly as Congresswoman Sanchez, Vice Chair Sanchez said, if you stick to what the Hurd bill does, it is about dreamers, it's about security at the border. It actually captures most of what the Border Patrol says they need. But on the family unification piece, that's for a larger comprehensive immigration debate. And that's not what this is. Right now, the clock is ticking. Protections are being lost as we stand here every day, over 100, more than 15,000 already, and that number will grow until we pass a bill. And those protections for dreamers. So why don't we just do that, build confidence, build bridges, and then come to the table and say, now let's talk about comprehensive immigration reform in a way that addresses the temporary protected status of so many people in our country, which the White House from time to time expresses some interest in dealing with. But they keep moving around, and whether that's a negotiating tactic or whatever it is, as I've said to them before, that may work on Wall Street or it may work in New York real estate. But here, the vote is the currency of the realm. What are the votes there for? People in Congress want to know, some of them, what will the president sign? Without any basis on evidence, data, and the rest, he makes these statements about newcomers to our country and equating it in a criminal way. What was that about? What was that about last night? So it was, I would say, confusing. It was worse than that. It was dangerous, what he said last night. And it has instilled fear, as I say over and over. What he is doing brings tears to the eyes of the Statue of Liberty and instills fear in the hearts of people who are concerned about our dreamers.
But Leader, are you saying then that if Republicans keep pushing for family-based legal migration to be part of this agreement on dreamers, it's a non-starter for your caucus?
Well, it depends on what it is. If they want to listen to understand what family unification is instead of calling it chain migration. What I'm getting from...
But beyond the semantics.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But what they're redefining the nuclear family in what they're saying. And that just isn't right. So again, you have to have the facts.
Let me reiterate the point, because I think, I don't know whether you watched it on television or not. I was sitting next to the president. Durbin was sitting to his right. Grassley, who has never voted for an immigration bill, said we need to take care of these dreamers who, after all, didn't do anything wrong. There were 25 of us, including Lujan Grisham, the chair of the Hispanic Caucus, sitting around. At the end, the president says, does anybody disagree with that? Not a single voice was raised in opposition to dealing with the DACA students. Remember how this happened. The president withdrew the protections of the DACA eligibles and said this was not done correctly. He didn't say he disagreed with the policy. In fact, he said, I love the dreamers. What he said was it should be done legislatively. Do it legislatively. Send me the bill. I will sign it. I left the White House, frankly, thinking to myself, the president said to Senator Grassley and to Senator Feinstein, yes, that will be the first phase. That's how he referred to it. Take care of the DACA. Get them off the table. Everybody agrees. 87% of the American public says, you're not going to send those kids to a country they don't know and is not theirs. 87% of the American public respond in polls, keep them here and give them a path to citizenship.
So where do your negotiations stand?
We're trying to get that phase done. Now, Majority Leader McCarthy, as you may recall if you watched, jumped in and said, well, what the president meant was, he called it chain, I corrected him, family, and family reunification, border security, and then what they call diversity. Now, we weren't fully clear of what they had in mind until 48 hours later, when the president profanely and bigotedly talked about people coming from countries of color. So the answer, in my view, and what I'm trying to do in the part that I am playing with, by the way, Pete Aguilar and Michelle Lujan Grisham, representing the Tri-Caucuses, not just themselves, but the Tri-Caucus, is to get an agreement on what I think the president said, dreamers, and what I think the American public overwhelmingly want to see resolved. And so we're trying to get there.
Madam Leader.
And on behalf of anybody on this, as you enter into these negotiations, trying to get something on DACA, trying to get something on immigration, trying to get something on the caps, is there a difference between your position and Senator Schumer and the pressures of your caucus, whereas you might have to address some of the liberal concerns in your caucus, whereas he might have to address...
Absolutely not. We are totally in unison. And for some reason, I guess it attracts attention. There's been some interest in making it look as if we're not. We are worked totally in unison on this. If there never were one dreamer in the world, and thank God there are many, we still have a problem on the caps. This is about the parity. This is about the budget bill. Maybe people don't understand when we say parity and caps what this is. What we're trying to say to the Republicans is, we take an oath to protect and defend the American people. We want the security that we need in terms of our defense bill. But our security in the domestic budget is 1/3 of the domestic budget. It's about homeland security. It's about the Veterans Affairs Administration. It's about the State Department. It's about anti-terrorism activity of the Justice Department. 1/3 of the domestic budget is security, is a security function. In addition to which, the investments that we have to make in the health and education and well-being of the American people are a source of our strength, as well as our military might, which is important as well. So this debate is about, if you want to increase the defense spending, and we are not objecting to that, we have to have a commensurate increase on the domestic side. You cannot increase defense and bleed the domestic budget and think we're going to be a strong nation. And part of what we're putting out there is bipartisan, and everything we've talked about bipartisan bill in terms of the Affordable Care Act. That too. Bipartisan. By the way, when the president has the Republicans cheering about lifting the mandate, that was a Republican idea. Mitt Romney, Heritage Foundation, that was no free riders. That was no free riders, a mandate that everyone had to participate. But to get back to this point, so what we have been proposing, both in what we're talking about in terms of dreamers, has been bipartisan. What we're talking about in terms of infrastructure has never been partisan. It's always been bipartisan, except if President Obama suggested something, that is. And now the Republicans would resist. But now, on this, we're saying, okay, let us increase the domestic budget in the following ways. Important investments in stopping the opioid epidemic. The President said it's important. You have to put the money there. Increasing the funding for our veterans. We know they need more funding. It's on the domestic side of the agenda. Increase the funding for our veterans. National Institutes of Health, where the biblical power to cure requires more. If you have a scientific opportunity, you have a moral responsibility to honor it, and that's job creating as well. Addressing our pension issue. And then separate from that, the entire issue on the emergency funding side of disaster assistance. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands having a big shortfall, but addressing the other needs of states with hurricanes, dangerous fires, and the rest. So everything we're talking about, it doesn't have a partisan tilt to it at all. They're all issues where if you ask people, you bring it to the floor, it would win a bipartisan vote. So again, if there never were one dreamer, we're still having this fight because they don't want to fund the domestic side. That's what it's about. And they have to try to sell that to their members by increasing defense, but at the expense of domestic, and we cannot, we can do better. And so, yes, the Dreamers are part of that negotiation, but we're not there yet on the money. So nobody should say the Dreamers are holding up that negotiation.
Madam Leader.
I promise two.
When you dealt with former President George W. Bush, you had big disagreements over the war, over Social Security, but you had a relatively productive relationship.
You did.
It may have been helped by the fact that he wasn't going to be running for re-election. When you look ahead to potentially being in the majority next year, can you forge a productive relationship with President Trump, considering you?
Well, we had, again, may I just say, and I appreciate your calling to everyone's attention, that while we had serious disagreements, I think the war in Iraq is a tragedy for our nation, and hopefully one day there'll be an admission of that. But nonetheless, not to hold us up on issues that we had to move forward with the American people. And so we were able to find agreement. We passed the biggest energy bill in the history of our country. He wanted nuclear, I wanted renewables. Our caucus wanted renewables. We came to agreement. It was like taking tens of millions of cars off the road in terms of emissions and the rest, lowering the addressing the CAFE standards. PEPFAR, he wanted PEPFAR, we wanted big PEPFAR. That would be the drugs for addressing the HIV and AIDS crisis throughout the world. He was a champion on it. He takes pride in it, and he should. And he and Mrs. Bush continue to be involved in that issue, and they're to be saluted for that. Other issues that related to using the tax code to help people using the tax code to help people at the low end of the economic scale, very progressive agenda. The list goes on and on. Contrary to what the Republicans did when they took the majority and President Obama was there, and they said, our most important thing we can do is to make sure he doesn't succeed. That unpatriotic, un-American. We always have a responsibility to find common ground in the minority or the majority. That's our responsibility to the American people. And when we can't find it, we must stand our ground. That's our responsibility to the American people as well. And we are constantly open to finding solutions that meet the needs of the American people, but to do so that doesn't go to the lowest common denominator, but to some kind of vision, a better future, better deal, better jobs, better pay, better future. Who can disagree with that?
Very last question.
Leader Pelosi, you spoke earlier this week about how if Democrats take back Congress, that you'd want to work on a fair tax system. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean? Is that basically like a repeal and replace of the new tax law?
Well, it may have to be a replace and repeal. Replace them and repeal the bill. Mr. Crowley and Congresswoman Sanchez, they're on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm going to defer to them on this. But we've always said you can't do a tax bill without having it be bipartisan. We want to recognize that perhaps we should lower the corporate rate. Maybe that's so, maybe not. What's the case for it? But if you're going to have sustainability in a tax reform, it has to be bipartisan. And instead, they came up with something that gives 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. 86 million middle-class families will be paying more in taxes. They took us deeply into debt to the tune of $2 trillion or more when you include the interest on the national debt, giving a permanent tax cut of over $1 trillion to corporate America. Just not right. Just not right. And so there is a better way to do that. And our path, to just use one word as to what it would look like, is it would be bipartisan. I yield to the members of the committee.
I would only say briefly that the benefits of the 86 bill was a bipartisan bill, done in conjunction with then Speaker O'Neill and President Reagan. That was woefully, entirely lacking in this process. There was no Democratic input. It was never asked for, and is reflective in the bill that was passed. Quite frankly, we would look towards having a more fair and more balanced approach to tax writing in the Democratic majority.
Joe, can I just add something to that? Look, on the tax bill, 83.1% goes to the top 1% and corporations, 16.9% to everyone else. When you further break that down and you see what actually made it to the middle class, I recognize there was something there, but it doesn't add up. This is simply not fair. And the American people see that. It's why they are overwhelmingly rejecting this. It's why the super PAC tied to Paul Ryan said, go out, Republicans, and try to sell this to the American people, because they see it for the scam that it is. Number one, I would say the Republicans continue to try to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people, and they are smarter than that. And the one thing that's not being talked about, Chad, once upon a time, Fox used to profess these commitments from our Republican colleagues about budgets that would be adopted and their commitments to get this done and certainty for our military. And they seem to be ignoring the call from Secretary Mattis when he says that these short-term CRs are bad for the country, bad for national security, bad for military preparedness. They need to be called out. And when I say they, my Republican colleagues need to be called out for that. This is not good for the country. Democrats are willing to work together to the question about President Bush and going forward. Democrats are willing to work together in a bipartisan way today. But we don't see that being that outreach from the president nor from our Republican colleagues. And that has to change. And that's what the American people want. They want to see what we're going to do. There's enough reasons with concerns with the other side. They want people to come together and get real results. And I'm certainly hopeful that we can carry that conversation forward and make sure that 2018 comes to be a year that we're able to put American people first, earn back their trust, and get back to work.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.